Section 8 of my presentation, entitled Mass Conformity and the American Herd. Quote from Hermann Hesse: "The community spirit at present is only a manifestation of the herd instinct. Men fly into each other's arms because they are afraid of each other." Hermann Hesse from Damien. The herd is everywhere, the herd is one. Hallowed be the herd. Embrace the mass, that's me. The idiots have won, Grace Slick. The future is in crowds, Don DeLillo. The pet rock and hot dog water. My concept of the herd. What makes the herd the herd? Everybody on this planet today is a member of the herd. I'm not included because I'm not on this planet, I'm only visiting. Power of self-delusion and self-hypnosis. Spiritual and other weaknesses. Conformism. Weakness of mind, weakness of spirit, weakness of soul, etc. Jose Ortega's ideas, ignobility versus nobility. The noble seek to follow their own value systems beyond the point of self-harm or even self-destruction. Jose Ortega y Gasset, The Revolt of the Masses. Quote, "The masses enjoy the pleasures and use the instruments invented by the select groups." Unquote. That's not an unquote. Quote continues. "The characteristic of the hour is that the commonplace mind, knowing itself to be commonplace, has the assurance to proclaim the rights of the commonplace and to impose them wherever it will. To be different is to be indecent. The mass crushes beneath it everything that is different, everything that is excellent, individual, qualified, and select. Anybody who is not like everybody else, who does not think like everybody else, runs the risk of being eliminated." Further quotes from Jose Ortega from Revolt of the Masses. "Those who make great demands on themselves, piling up difficulties and duties, and those who demand nothing special of themselves, but for whom to live is to be every moment what they already are. There is one fact which, whether for good or ill, is of utmost importance in the public life of Europe at the present moment. This fact is the accession of the masses to complete social power, as the masses, by definition, neither should nor can direct their own personal existence, and still less rule society in general. This fact means that actually Europe is suffering from the greatest crisis that can afflict peoples, nations, civilizations. The herd are sponges for soaking up the idiot culture. Self-propaganda produces self-hypnosis. False communion everywhere." This is another quote from Hermann Hesse. "False communion everywhere shedding the responsibility of fate, flights to the herd for warmth." Another quote by Hermann Hesse. "All this false communion close to collapsing. Everywhere we could observe the reign of the herd instinct. Nowhere freedom and love. All this false communion, from the fraternities to the choral societies and the nations themselves, was an inevitable development, was a community born of fear and dread, out of embarrassment, but inwardly rotten, outworn, close to collapsing. Oblique values of postmodernity, the new left, militant conformity to nonconformity, establishment of the counterculture. Counterculture becomes the establishment, postmodernism, its discontents and its contents. We are witnessing," this is a quote from Vernon Young, from his essay, Notes on the Compulsive Revolution, 1969. Quote, "We are witnessing a revolution by the first generation that was picked up when it cried. Someone in the authoritative profession, whose name escapes me, was quoted in a recent issue of Encounter to the effect that we are witnessing a revolution by the first generation that was picked up when it cried. America is the first true empire of the herd. It is an empire designed to produce and promote the cowardly, the conforming, the dishonest, the thoughtless, and the weak. Every member of the herd suffers from slave ache. Slave ache is an illness that comes from being a nobody in a society full of celebrities. Slave ache is related to please, love me nihilism. Crowds going crazy for pop stars like the Beatles, Michael Jackson. Narcissistic need to merge with famous figures loved by all. But actually, deep down inside, the masses really hate these people. They envy these people. Fantasy is if they could just be like famous guy, everyone would love them too, and so would not matter that they don't love themselves. Sickest part is fantasy that if they hug or even just touch the person, the fame and love will somehow rub off on them. Slave ache and 9/11, the narcissistic yearning of the American herd. The narcissistic yearning of postmodern American men, women, postmodern humankind for attention, for acceptance, for bare bones minimum ability to love themselves and or to accept themselves, which they have never come close to achieving. These are prerequisites for psychological survival, let alone psychological thriving. Slave ache and 9/11 hysteria. People today attempt to attach themselves to as many significant events that get a lot of nationwide publicity as they can, under the assumption that somehow it will make them significant. That's one of the reasons you hardly ever meet a Jew these days who hasn't lost someone in the Holocaust. Slave ache, 9/11, and the narcissistic yearning of the American herd. 9/11's happened several times. 9/11's happened several times a week in the rest of the world. Hysterical need for attention is the point beyond the relentless obsession with 9/11, but not the only point. The attention they seek doesn't always have to be real. They can fantasize the attention and achieve some partial or near gratification. It's all a fantasy ultimately anyway. That's why I demand that quasi-sane people recognize the growing movement towards psychosis throughout the society. The herd live in desperate fear of being alone. The herd have a terror of being alone. This is one reason why friendships and romantic love affairs are so shallow, fragile, and temporary today. People today have dozens of friends who aren't even friends. They have too many good relations with too many nondescript people. The herd suck up to each other in order to ensure that they are not rejected by anybody. They seek continuous, repetitive acceptance from everyone they can find to ward off the feelings of free-floating rejectedness that they live with daily and especially nightly. Oblivions. Oblivions are a new type of humanoid creature. They are not only oblivious to the world around them, they are oblivious to the world inside them because they have no inside of them to be aware of. They are focused on the bare minimum essentials of daily life and nothing more. They bump into you on the street and without even noticing themselves. They function like a school of fish in the ocean. Obliviousness is a measurable state of mind. It's a lack of a sense of physical awareness of the world around them. They have no interest, or it should be the social part of the physical world. They have no interest in seeing the world. They are focused exclusively on their messaging, They're focused exclusively on their massaging of their navels. The non-individual individual. The triumph of the American herd marks the historical end of the self-directed individual and the beginning of the era of the other, directed, conformist, non-individual. What comes out of people's mouths today has little or nothing to do with how they actually think, feel, or act, and in point of fact, is normally diametrically opposed to how they think, feel, and act. Personal programmability. Members of the herd score high on what I call personal programmability. The more programmable you are, the more fit you are for slavery. The less programmable you are, the more fit you are for freedom, provided, of course, you are beyond resentment and affirm life in its wholeness. Nobodies of America unite. This country is full of nobodies who are angry at the world because they aren't somebodies. They vent this anger at any convenient target. Core worthlessness. Members of the herd have a half-conscious inner feeling of core worthlessness. You can't just come out and randomly prod people in the center of their core worthlessness. Or can you? The good folk are dangerous. Good people, normal people, are a lynch mob waiting to happen. People who are honest and sincere don't think of themselves as good. They see themselves as wanting to become good or better and striving for moral perfectibility. When someone tells you they are good, don't buy it. When someone tells you, when somebody tells you they are a victim or talks about themselves as a victim, run for your life. Because if you are not a member of the self-appointed victim group, when any little excuse gives them a chance, they will make you an enemy and do you harm. People who have virtually nothing inside them to give resent the hell out of people who are asking to be given something from them. Other people's needs and requests only remind them of their emptiness and hollowness. America's freak salad. Today's leisure class of distorted freaks. America's freak salad. PMA erected this infrastructure so that these fluffs have freedom and leisure to play their sick linguistic games. Christo-American perversions of the concept of nobility and the noble. The truly noble man sacrifices others for the sake of his ideals, rather than sacrificing himself for others. Characteristic trait of members of the herd is lack of nobility. Plus, they get the concept of nobility exactly backwards. The herd say, a person is noble to the degree he is willing to sacrifice himself for his neighbors or for others. This is because they live in fear and feel the need to be protected for the entirety of their lives. This is, of course, a perversion of the concept of nobility in herd popular plastic idiot culture. It's residue from Christo-Judaic ideologies. True nobility is almost the exact reverse. To be noble is to act out of a sense of duty rather than out of personal interest, but duty to one's own ideals and the plans for their enactment. Noble versus slaves, today's herd. Slaves cannot understand someone acting not for their own gain or interest, especially when they're not acting in their own interest as to sacrifice for others. To be noble is to sacrifice oneself for one's ideals, not for other people. Other people is not an ideal. Depending upon who you are supposedly sacrificing for, the noble man sacrifices himself for his ideals, not for people, and rather than sacrificing oneself for others, in fact, the truly noble man will sacrifice other people for his ideas as well, without questioning or hesitation. Of course, that's not the only characteristic that makes a person noble. Characteristics of true morality: aloofness from the social world, courage as in complete mastery of one's fears, the institution of one's personal morality, stoicism, control over one's emotional world, control over one's body, as in not being susceptible to physical pain and not being controlled by physical desires, conquest of one's ressentiment, resulting in amor fati. The cow and cattle people, the herd, are not even capable of understanding these qualities of a person. Their self-protective view of nobility is that a noble man is someone who will not hurt them. This is the watered-down, postmodern, Christo-Judaic morality of the 6-year-old, or plastio-kitsch morality. American perversion of the concept of the good life. In an authentic culture like that of the ancient Achaeans, the good life referred specifically to the moral life, characteristic of the moral life for the Hellenes, the examined life for starters. Post-World War II Europeans and Americans are violently opposed to the idea of the examined life without even knowing what the hell it is. It's not just that they're too lazy and afraid, indeed terrified, to engage in self-examination or any other kind of examination. They will destroy anyone who attempts to wake them from their present mode of existence, which should be termed the unexamined life. The higher the status of your pose, the stronger your defenses against feelings of rejection. Trying to enlighten members of herd. I try to educate and enlighten members of the herd free of charge, but I usually have to resort to a question like this. Do you have your own brain, or do you rent one from somebody else, or from a stupid brain factory, or from a low IQ rental shop? Can you think for yourself or not? They usually do not understand at all what I'm talking about. It's amazing. It's truly amazing. I do not give or ask for help. Howard Rourke, quote from The Fountainhead. Special knowledge produces specialness. This is fuel behind the conspiracy theory subculture today. If you know about a conspiracy of importance to the country as a whole, you have special knowledge of something, and you can trade that in for specialness and attention. People need attention no matter how healthy their ego structure. When you are a member of a mob, when you are a member of a crowd, you don't receive adequate individual attention, and people become attention-starved. Dozens of examples today. Pulling down monuments is one. The group self and herd conformity. The collective brain, quote from film version of The Fountainhead. Members of the herd are people who are not capable of even the most shallow level of self-knowledge. Because they lack any self-understanding, they lack a true sense of self. Because they have no sense of their own self, they tune in to the group self that is happening all around them. They conform their identity to the group. This is not a single human specimen on this. There's not a single human specimen on this planet who is not a member of the herd. This is what I call the worldwide herd. The American herd is a subset of the worldwide herd. There are many different cliques and subsets of the American herd. There are many more subsets of the world herd paralleling the world herd. Here, self is not meant in the psychological sense, but in the existential, ontological, philosophic sense. They purchase a carbon copy of the group self that is offered for sale to anyone in the country regardless. Today, equality has become a code word for conformity. The herd lusts for naked power but is terrified to show it. Reason Americans hate Saddam and Hitler is because they want to be Saddam and Hitler. It certainly is not because they give a shit about people's freedom or whether innocent people are killed unnecessarily or not. They're jealous, insanely jealous of the naked power of the absolute authoritarian dictator. They're absolutely fascinated by such people. Just look at how many shows there are on cable television. Americans cannot get enough repression of freedom or ruthless violence waged against the helpless of the world. Up close, perhaps they may feel sympathy for such people, or of course the Americans' innate identification with the underdog. Although they certainly feel much sympathy of any support, of bond with the Indians as they slaughter them, or with the Negroes as they rape them. Oops, let me rephrase that. They felt sympathy after they were exterminated away or stepped over and stomped on, so severely that they would be crippled for centuries and unable to stand up on their own 2 feet for generation upon generation. But they prefer to view such spectacles of suffering from middle to long distance, where nobody can see their true reactions. You know the joke about character being how one behaves when there are no witnesses. Every member of the herd is a lynch mob waiting to happen. They may not actually use a rope and a tree to lynch you, like in the old days, but they have their postmodern substitutes nonetheless. Poor white trash TV shows, criminal trials, police, etc., they have their postmodern means. Or should I say postmodern means. In herd society, people are interchangeable units for the most part. The herd is lacking in real morality. Real morality is about character and integrity. It's about being a stand-up guy or a trooper girl. Being a member of the herd disqualifies them from stand-upness. This is where the current cult of self-righteous pseudo-moralizing begins. The Talosian syndrome, greatest example of Stephen Hawking, all brains, no brawn, Einstein is another example. The Talosian syndrome is a recent ideology, my term, which suggests that it is a good thing to have human organisms on the earth who are all brain and no brawn, all mentality and no physicality. The first of Gene Roddenberry's and Harlan Ellison's scripts for the science fiction TV series of the 1960s Star Trek, especially the original pilot movie, first introduced this literary characterological concept to the TV world. I don't know about the rest of the world. Talosian syndrome is an extended application of better worldism. The rise and the triumph of Talosianism in PMA is the result of better worldist nihilism. It appeals to herd Eloism. The herd are mostly little furry, fearful creatures to begin with. When they look at or consider persons such as Albert Einstein or Stephen Hawking, they feel to themselves, he's good because he's smart and he cannot do me any harm because he's all soul and no body. It also suggests a substitute for past discredited notions of heavens or afterworlds, because someone who possesses mentality but no physicality suggests that idea of disembodied souls. Albert Einstein is the nadir of human evolutionary development. Arguments against Talosianism. Intelligence is ignoble in a man who lacks physical courage. The end of theoretical man has come. Einstein is the penultimate example of what's wrong. Hawking is the perfect example of this sickness. We can develop from our present technological limitations to evolve into Eloi, and worse, to the creatures in Captain Pike's pilot episode of Star Trek, the original Talosians. Intellectuals, scholars, professors, doctors, scientists are all too cerebral. In future, all people will be raised with enough physicality to enable them to survive a street fight, regardless of how high their IQ. Brains without brawn is, by itself, prima facie an ego defense. Most of the scientific and artistic achievements in U.S. find their roots in monarchy and or dictatorship. For example, we are proud that we put a man on the moon. But putting a man on the moon was essentially an achievement of Nazi scientists. The herd and its inherent Talosianism. Point of Shaw's Pygmalion, that the life of the mind, the intellectual, the artist, the scientist, the scholar, the professor, is in essence a flight from love and from the vulnerability inherent in loving. Image of a school of fish, lemmings, darting around obstacles, strafing each other, but always ultimately moving in the same direction to the same destination. Here's the key to what's going on. Politics are no longer politics in this country. At this point of our decline, politics are personal. A true nonconformist is someone who knows exactly why, epistemologically, the majority is wrong. True individuals differ from the herd in terms of values, character traits, talents, and tastes, but most of all by their mastery over themselves, their ability to see the truth, to see reality, their self-perfectibility, their self-understanding, and their transcendence over all feelings of ressentiment. Perfect self-knowledge and self-understanding removes ressentiment permanently. Capacity for freedom is a personality trait that is both differential and measurable like other testable personality traits. One thing that reveals a person as a herd member being extremely low in the capacity for freedom. Postmodernism as the herd's final and complete rejection of nature. Nature's rejection of the herd should soon follow. Actually, it's already started. Earthquakes, hurricane, forest fires, floods. If one is well adjusted in a sick society, doesn't that imply that one is sick oneself? If one is well adjusted in a perverted society, shouldn't that suggest that one is also perverted? Postmortem American mauvais foi. Disneylandism and the American Disneyland Dream World Fantasy Camp. This is another great quote from Gary Cox's great book, How to Be an Existentialist. Quote, authenticity consists in embracing human reality for what it is and living in accordance with it rather than pretending it is something else. A nice fairy tale reality where dreams come true without effort, where debts don't have to be paid back, where knights in shining armor ride to the rescue and we all live happily ever after. Authenticity involves living without regret. Gary Cox. The thing about members of the herd is they fancy a lot. They fancy themselves a lot. They fancy themselves this or that, or they fancy themselves that. Perhaps their characteristic gesture is to fancy themselves. They are great posers, and what they fancy in themselves or about themselves is Play-Doh, the essential material for most of their most essential poses. Their most all-encompassing poses constitute the identity pose, with which they present themselves to the world and see importantly to themselves, and most importantly to themselves with some pseudo-identity, like purple hair says, see, I'm more of an individual than you are. The understanding of the concept's individual or personal identity is so shallow as to be linked solely to differentiating hair color. Because they or some special tattoo that they believe nobody else has that makes them special. Because they lack a sincere sense of self and therefore a true sense of identity, they are stuck in shallowness mode and cannot see their own personal bullshit. The American plastics industry chronicles fakeness. The American pork industry chronicles weakness. Being plastic is being inauthentic. Being a pig is to be hedonistic and weak. Hedonistic herd morality. People of this society have degenerated into a purely hedonistic herd morality. Good is whatever gives them pleasure and evil is whatever scares or hurts them. It originates from what I call the morality of the 6-year-old, bequeathed to us from the dead Judeo-Christian tradition. But the American herd has made it worse. The herd is everywhere, the herd is one, hallowed be the herd, embrace the mass. Every single Homo sapien on this planet or in outer space at this particular time is a member of the herd. There are no exceptions. The epistemology of the herd. When they think they know something, there is always some underlying subtext involving self-congratulatory, egocentric self-reference. The rejects of any society are of two types. The absolute worst of that society, insane people, and of course, as always, the absolute best of that society, as in the mad genius. In herd society, the best is always remote and obscured. There is no justice so long as the herd is free. The botched and bungled billions. Postmortem America is a dictatorship of the herd. They don't think for themselves, they just repeat other people's opinions that they heard growing up. It's just amazing the rapidity with which they repeat and reiterate mindlessly with the self-awareness of a cactus in the Sonoran Desert in Arizona somewhere. Apes of their ideals. Problem is they don't even have any ideals in the first place to be apes of. Newspaper readers are imprisoned in the moment. They lack the imagination to be anywhere else temporarily. As people become more herd-like, collectivist, and conformist, in this society they become softer, weaker, more interdependent, and more facile and easier to manipulate. They become more delicate, more fractured, more fragile. This is the origin of the delicacy people who are the most herd-like are exhibiting today, wherein you cannot use attack therapy today as you could back in my day. People have weaker ego structure today, making them more delicate emotionally. Postmodernism as the herd's final and complete rejection of nature. Nature's rejection of the herd should follow soon. Please love me nihilism and cliché repetition. Members of the American herd are blinded by what I call please love me nihilism. They cannot think for themselves, so they cliché repeat endlessly what other people say to vent their own emotional angst because 1. The work of thinking for themselves is too hard for them, and 2. Really thinking for yourself is dangerous because you might become unpopular and you need the acceptance of other cow people, members of the American herd like yourselves. Mouse behavior. Mouse behavior, cowering away in fear at the slightest disturbance of the ordinary in public, as in the movie Fisher King. The herd, their minds are like giant trash cans, dumpsters even. They just keep filling up pop culture trash, pulp fiction crap, really bad music. The worst music that any society has yet created, in fact. Juvenile motion pictures. Their minds overflow with garbage, which comes out through their mouth holes. The American Catastrophe. 4 films on the subject. Pulp Fiction, Falling Down, American Beauty, and Fight Club. Most important films chronicling the American catastrophe. The most perceptive films dealing with the American catastrophe were serious works of satire. The President's Analyst and The Magic Christian are 2 of them. Dialogue about freedom from the film Easy Rider. George Hansen. You know, this used to be a hell of a good country. I can't understand what's gone wrong with it. Billy. Man, everybody got chicken. That's what happened. Hey, we can't even get into like a second-rate motel. I mean, a second-rate hotel. I mean, a second-rate motel, you dig? They think we're going to cut their throat or something. They're scared, man. George Hansen. They're not scared of you. They're scared of what you represent. Billy. Hey, man, all we represent to them, man, is somebody who needs a haircut. George Hansen. Oh, no. What you represent to them is freedom. Billy. What the hell is wrong with freedom? That's what it's all about. George Hansen. Oh, yeah, that's right. That's what it's all about. All right. But talking about it and being it, that's 2 different things. I mean, it's real hard to be free when you are bought and sold in the marketplace. Of course, don't ever tell anybody that they aren't free, because then they're going to get real busy killing and maiming to prove to you that they are. Oh, yeah, they're going to talk to you and talk to you and talk to you about individual freedom. But they see a free individual, it's going to scare them. Billy. Well, it don't make them running scared. George Hansen. No, it makes them dangerous. Important quote for understanding what's going on today. The group self and herd conformity. The worldwide herd versus the American herd. Collective brain quote from the film version of Fountainhead. Members of the herd are people who are not capable of even the most shallow level of self-knowledge. Because they lack any self-understanding, they lack a true sense of self. Because they have no sense of their own, they tune in to the group itself that is happening the group self that is happening all around us. They conform their identity to the group. There is not a single human specimen on the planet who is not a member of the herd. This is what I call the worldwide herd. Excuse me. The American herd is a subset of the worldwide herd. There are many different cliques and subsets of the American herd. There are many more subsets of the world herd paralleling the American herd. Here, self is not necessarily meant in the psychological sense, but in the existential, ontological, philosophic sense. They purchase a carbon copy of the group self that is offered for sale to anyone in the country regardless, and free of charge. That is the end. Thank you very much for listening or watching.